Hey team, Tim from High Performance Academy here. Welcome to today's members webinar where we're going to be talking all about brake temperature data, how to make use of it and what it all means. Like we always do, let's start with a little bit of a wrap up of what's been going on around the workshop for us, a couple of the updates on the cars we're working on. So jump across to my laptop screen here. So a lot of you guys that will be following us regularly will know that we're right in the throes of building, or at least upgrading one of our little endurance racing cars, which is a Toyota GT86 powered by an SR20 VET engine. One of the big things that's been going on recently has been fitting all of the large aerodynamic devices and also just integrating those into the bodywork. So we've been doing things like building new front bumpers, modifications to some of the ducting and stuff like that. So I just thought I'd just give you a bit of a time lapse of some of the stuff that's been happening over the last couple of weeks with respect to that. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit to give you guys a little bit of a better perspective of that. So I'll just point out a couple of basic features here. We've got our ducting, which is, this is the inlet of the main duct here. And this is the outlet, which runs through the bonnet up here. So the idea here is everything for the intercooler and the radiator flows through that duct. And the idea behind all of that is that's a converging, diverging duct. So it, diverges and converges. So it opens up on the inlet and it closes down on the outlet. And that's all about pressure recovery. We've actually got a whole video out there all talking just about that, but that's a pretty common way of arranging ducting to get quite high efficiency cooling air through your cooling system. There's a couple of other pieces in here that you can't, we've got them removed in this particular photo. There are inlets either side of that main duct for two oil coolers. One side on this particular side of the car, this is for the engine oil cooler, and we've got one on the other side for the transmission cooler. So the idea is that air comes in here and it actually exhausts out just below, so at the back part of the front bumper there. One of the things in this photo here is this is sort of at the point where we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with the front bumper. We knew we had to redo the front bumper because we've got a big diffuser, a splitter and diffuser fitted to the front of the car, and we had to integrate that with the factory style bumper. So at this point here, what you can actually see is we've gone ahead and filled, this is from a couple of weeks ago, we've filled in where the factory spotlights and everything integrate down here, as well as where the factory indicators are. We've filled all of those in with ABS plastic. And at this point in time, everything was actually trimmed off the bottom. This is the splitter that I was talking about that runs along here, and you can see actually just down here, you can see the start of the tunnels, which are the expansions that happen underneath the splitter to help give you your front downforce that you get with an aerodynamic device like this. So long story short, essentially what we need to do is integrate the front bumper into that splitter to get them to fit nicely together. So this is at the point where we had sort of trimmed away all the pieces we didn't want, and we were starting to rebuild exactly what we wanted in there. So if we go to the next shot here, before I show you what we've done at the front, this is how the rear is currently looking. So you can see we've got, I'll zoom in a little bit there as well. You can see we've got our big rear diffuser. So this thing's relatively large for an endurance racing car anyway. And we've got this pretty big rear wing on it as well. So all of this packaged with the front splitter, the wing, and that rear diffuser were all designed for us by Top Stage Composites in Australia. All that is designed to go in as a package together, so it's not just random stuff slapped onto this thing. It is all actually designed to work together. The stuff that the guys in the workshop have been doing, they went ahead and designed these rear wing stays which integrate into the mount for the diffuser and everything like that. There was quite a bit of work that went on to make sure that this was serviceable. It's one thing to make something strong and stiff and reliable. It's another thing to make sure that it's easy to work on. So one of the things that we had to take quite a lot of care on, and maybe a little bit of compromise, was making sure we could still get the rear boot lid off. So it doesn't pivot anymore. It actually comes off on some quick release fasteners, and you can sort of pull the boot off sideways off the car rather than normally pivoting up. So that is a compromise, but at least it is still quick to get the boot open if we need to get in there, service or anything, which is where things like the main fuel filters, the fuel surge tank and everything in there are all stored inside the boot. So this is moving a little bit further down the process after the guys have sort of mocked up a buck for the front of the car. So the buck is the part that you make when basically you make the real part that you want, that you're then going to take a mold off, and you can then lay the composite inside the mold to make the real part. So the buck is kind of like making the shape that you want, but it's not actually going to be the real part. It's sort of like, you can think of it as the model for what the final part you're making. So there's a little bit going on in this picture. I'll just describe exactly what's going on. Didn't get down there quickly enough to get the picture of it when it was completely before they started making the mold. But what's going on, basically everything you can see in gray here, all the sort of light gray area in here, this is the buck, and this is a combination of the factory front bumper, MDF wood, there's some steel in there, there's certainly a lot of body filler and stuff as well. Essentially it doesn't matter what you make that out of because it's not a real part, it's just finding the way of building up the shapes that you need sort of as quickly and effectively, and that's why it's got so many different sort of pieces of material in there, because it depends exactly on what you're trying to make and the fastest way to do it. So you can see here we've got the inlets for those oil coolers that I was talking about before. We've got the front of the duct inlet, which integrates with the new front bumper in there as well. Now there's a little bit more going on in here as well. You see these little black pieces, which may be a little bit hard to see. These are like a plastic core flute material. You can see them sitting around here as well. These are not part of the final design. The purpose of these is we use it as part of the mold making process to allow us to separate the front bumper, or that whole mold, into multiple pieces. And lots of pieces like that, certainly when you've got a complicated shape like we do here, the idea is that you usually have the mold, to get the part out at the end, you usually need to have the mold built in multiple pieces so you can actually disassemble the mold to extract the part out of it. And that's exactly what's going on here. So everywhere we've got one of these black pieces of core flute section, that's a split line. That's going to be a split between two sides of the mold. So the idea is basically you go ahead and make each piece of the mold individually, wait for it to dry, and then you get on to the next part, and you can sort of build them up next to each other so you can get a nice smooth surface. One of the things we are doing while we're here is we're getting rid of the headlights. We don't actually need those to do the kind of racing that we're doing here in New Zealand for endurance racing, so we might as well get rid of them. So this is a little bit more weight to get out of the car and everything like that. It actually frees up a little bit of space in the front of the car to fit in things like, well, anything really, whether it's wiring, cooling, engine stuff, anything. Just having a little bit more space in the front of the car is always welcome, because it's certainly a pretty tight fit to get everything through there. You'll also see on there's a bit of a slight sheen. You can sort of see in this area up here, both on the headlights and on that top bumper skin. That's called, it's a release agent. So that's before they start laying up the mold on this part. They basically put a release agent on there. In this case, it's like a PVA release agent. The idea here is that it just stops your mold sticking to the part, so we know we can release them at the end. So that was sort of part of the way through the process. This is a little bit further on, where they've actually started to make that top section of the mold. Sorry, the top section of the mold, which is the first part that we made. The reason it's green, that's just a gel coat material. Gel coat is just used, essentially it is the first layer of the mold. It is in a sort of semi-liquidy kind of form. The idea here is that it gets into all of those nooks and crannies, and it allows it to wet out properly, so just to give you a nice smooth mold surface. So the idea here is that once you've laid the gel coat on, it still stays tacky. You can then lay your fiberglass over top, and that fiberglass is really what's going to give the mold its actual structure. So this is at the point where they've just started laying the gel coat down on that top part of the mold there. And you can see where this whole bottom section down here, this grey section, this is a whole separate part of the mold. So there's the green part is one part, this part down here is all another part, and then just around the corner into the wheel arches back behind here, there's two small parts, which you'll see, and I think another one of these shots coming through soon. So this is actually the mold once it's been removed from the car. So you can see there, you can still see that green sheen there from the gel coat. We've also got that fiberglass. It doesn't really matter, the fiberglass that you stick over top. It can be pretty rough and ready, because that gel coat takes up that nice smooth surface at the start. You do put one fine layer of fiberglass to really give that gel coat some strength. After that, you can really just slap down a whole lot of really cheap chop strand mat. But that's the reason I've got this picture here is you can really clearly see the split lines between the different molds. So you can see the front left headlight there. That's that split. It's sort of sitting on its front face at this point. This is that whole lower section where it integrates into the lower splitter, and this is that real little back section here which wraps around the back of the bumper. So it's actually a relatively complicated mold at this point, certainly for us in our workshop, where while we can do this sort of work, we're just certainly not specialists in doing anything with composite materials or anything like that. So this is a relatively involved process, but hopefully you can see it's certainly something that's within the bounds of most people if you're interested enough. This is a shot of the back of the Buck. So this is the, you can see the original ABS plastic bumper. The headlights obviously stayed in the car, so that's where you can see that's the gel coat surface. It's the inside of the mold that we'll be laying up into. Here you can see the absolute mess in behind this thing, where it really doesn't matter what it is as long as you get the right shape. We've got the MDF I was talking about. You can't quite see it, but this is a steel panel that's sitting in here, and all of this stuff is just really attached together as sort of simply and as quickly as you can get it while still getting a good surface finish. So really not pretty, but that's what's going on behind the Buck there. This is the final part that just got pulled out, I think late last week. This got pulled out of the mold. You can see there, basically all of this is fiberglass that gets laid up inside that mold. The first part we're going to make anyway is just out of fiberglass until we know we've got the right shape to our mold, make sure we're happy with everything. But the idea here is that all of that is all now in one piece. So everything, the whole front bumper, all of the inlets for all of the cooling, the headlights and everything can go on and off in one place. And it's quite nice because it does allow us to get in there and service things really quickly. One of the things we're going to need to be able to do on this car to get the car on and off its trailer, because it does have a really low ride height with the new aero stuff on it, is all of that, that whole front splitter and everything is all quick release. So it comes off the car with very few tools. It just pops off quite quickly. And it's also important that that bumper can pop off quite quickly to allow us to get the splitter off. So actually this whole front bumper assembly, while it's not shown in these photos, the guys are actually just doing it right now in the workshop. They're going ahead and fitting quick release fasteners to everything. So it's just a case, you don't actually need any tools to get this thing off. You can just pop them off just by clipping little clips there, and the whole thing comes off really quickly, which is a nice feature. Again, coming back to that serviceability thing I was talking about before. This is the last shot I'm going to show you guys from the 86 project that we've got going on. So this is looking at the underside of that front splitter. So this is sitting upside down on the bench. You can see this is one of those tunnel areas that I was telling you before where we get that expansion ratio. This here is this is the front corner, that front edge of the splitter. But the point I really want to make here is we're fitting these these skid blocks down here. These happen to be titanium. It's not really super important what you make these things out of. Titanium is a good thing to make skid blocks out of, simply because it doesn't actually corrode when you grind it down. You could use steel, but you will get a lot of rust and stuff, particularly when you get any moisture. And it's particularly when you're scraping these things on the ground all the time, you're exposing that new surface, and it just makes a bit of a mess of things when things are getting rusty. So titanium, it's not absolutely necessary, but it is an off-the-shelf product that we could buy, which is why we went with these. This is actually from a company called Professional Awesome, who sell a couple of different types of these titanium skid blocks. The idea here is we want something sacrificial. So when and if the splitter comes into contact with the ground, or at least gets close to the ground, we want to make sure we're wearing away something that we can quickly and easily replace, rather than take anything out of the main splitter itself, which is obviously made of carbon fiber. Really great stiff material, but has really poor abrasion resistance. What I mean by that, if we start grinding this thing on the road, it'll wear away really quickly. It really doesn't last long. So that's what's going on there. The guys are part way through building a little epoxy mount for that thing. The idea there is we can just quickly unbolt them from the top and replace them if we need to, but hopefully we won't be replacing them too often. Again, these front splitters, really a lot of their performance comes from running them really low to the ground. It is really important to have we have a ride height window that's been given to us by the manufacturer of this front splitter, and it's really important that you don't get too far out of that window, because it will mean that you will change the amount of downforce you've got in the front of the car quite considerably. So it is important to keep it within those sort of quite narrow bounds of ride height, and in order to do that, that means we need to put these skid blocks on. So if we do end up running it too low, we hit a curb or something like that, it just means we don't completely destroy the front splitter. So guys, that's it for the shop updates, this part of the webinar. I just want to go through one of the videos we put out recently on YouTube, so I'll just jump across to my browser here. So this video called 5 Mistakes You're Probably Making, Race Driving Errors. This is actually an excerpt from our recent race driver course that we recently released. So this is a video all about some of the most common things that the professional driving coach that was involved in making this course with us, some of the 5 most common things he sees people doing wrong. So this guy that we got to do the course with us, Andrew Waite, he's a professional race driver as well as being a professional driver coach. And he had a lot of really great input to give it to us on this course. And this is really like a huge bank full of knowledge that anyone who's going to take this course will get out of this thing. And this is a bit of an excerpt from that course. Let's scan through some of the topics that we've got going on here. So whether it's uncommitted braking, so that's all about not being aggressive enough on the initial brake application, overslowing the car, which is a really common thing, people just scrubbing too much speed in corner entry, not trailing the brake hard enough into the corner entry. What else have we got here? Apex acceleration. What else is this here? Multiple inputs. Multiple inputs is a big one. So rather than getting on the brake once and bleeding off, having multiple times where you get on the brake, off the brake, on the brake, off the brake, as you realize you overslowed it, and getting off and then getting back on as you get back to the apex, stuff like this. Same with hobby horsing on the throttle, making sure that once you get on the throttle at corner exit, you're staying on the throttle and not sort of getting on too early so you have to back out of again, which isn't quite an unsettling force to the car. Anyway, guys, I'll let you guys check that video out at your leisure as well. I definitely recommend you do. There's a lot of good free info in there for you guys. Let's jump across to the forum. There was a forum post that came out recently that I wanted to highlight to you guys. So this actually was put on the Practical Corner Weighting course forum. So this is all about, the question was what to do with your anti-roll bars. I'll go up to the top here so you can actually see about the topic post. Topic of the post, sorry, was the disconnect anti-roll bars. So this is all about when you're going ahead and doing your setup on your car, do you disconnect the anti-roll bar links, and why do you do that? So the idea here is that when you do your setup, obviously when the car's sitting there on a nice flat setup patch, which is usually the datum that you use, certainly when you're doing something like road racing anyway, the idea here is that you're usually making quite fine adjustments either to your main ride height or to your coilovers in terms of getting the corner weighting right. So corner weighting, if you're not familiar with it, it's essentially about evening out the load distribution of each tire on the car. A little bit of this is to do with how the weight is distributed with respect to the car. So things like where the driver sits, where the fuel tank is, where the engine's mounted. Usually you don't have a situation where it's very rare, certainly in something that's based on a road car, to have equal corner weights on your front left and front right and rear left to rear right. Certainly side to side on the car anyway. And that's usually what we're doing when we want to corner weight things. The outcome of that is you usually end up with some skew, some sort of offset from one side of the car to the other, let's say the left front and the left right, in order to equalize those corner weights on the setup patch. The problem is if you leave the anti-roll bar connected when you're doing that, obviously the anti-roll bar is a link that runs from one side of the suspension to the other. You end up sort of preloading that bar and adding what we call wedge, or essentially some lateral load transfer statically before the car's even moving on track. So I'll just sketch out exactly what I mean by that. So let's say we've got a side view of an anti-roll bar here. So we've got let's say this is our tire here. And let's say we're looking behind it, this is our anti-roll bar connection that runs here. And this is our pivot point. And let's say we've got a couple of different adjustment points there because we've got a nice adjustable anti-roll bar. And let's say our lower control arm is mounted down here and it runs back into the car. And usually what you have is some sort of link that attaches to the between something like the lower control arm and the anti-roll bar. It can really go between anything. It can go between the strut, the upper control arm, any of the other control arms in theory. The idea is that we're just connecting the anti-roll bar to the suspension. So obviously this thing's rotating up and down, so rotating around its pivot point as we're moving around the track. But the idea here is, and that adjustment I'm talking about, is zeroing the anti-roll bars once we've finished our wheel alignment. So the idea is that when you're doing your wheel alignment in your setup, you usually have one anti-roll bar link disconnected, one on the front, one on the back. You go ahead and do your whole setup procedure. Then you come back at the end and you zero your anti-roll bar link. So all you're doing is adjusting your anti-roll bar link, which is what we see down here. We're adjusting the length of this. So this is something in the aftermarket parts industry, in the motorsport world anyway, is certainly super common, is that these links usually have some sort of turnbuckle system on them. Maybe it's got rod ends on each end. There's all sorts of different ways these can be configured, but the idea is usually there's a lock nut to break off here, and you can wind this thing in and out to make it longer or shorter. This is the last thing we do after we've finished our setup. We go ahead and zero the anti-roll bar link so there's no force on that anti-roll bar. So that's really the backstory behind that forum post there. And if you guys are interested in learning more, you can jump into that forum post and read for yourself what I wrote there. Basically a summary of what I just talked about. So guys, we do have a number of courses in development at the moment. The biggest one that's coming out soon is our suspension fundamentals course, which I'm sure a lot of you guys will be really interested in. It's really just a 101 on suspension, particularly on motorsport suspension. So all the different suspension types, all of some of the intricacies, the pros and cons of each suspension type. We go through spring rate selection, damper tuning, how anti-roll bars work, a little bit more on what I discussed there. What else we got? Suspension geometry, and also some really useful calculations that you can actually do to start understanding and tuning your car balance for yourself on track. So I promise you, it's a course that's packed with heaps of really interesting information. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested in suspension and suspension tuning in particular. So guys, that's it for the pre-show. I'll jump back into the main part of the webinar, today's lesson on brake temperature tuning. I'll be back with you in a second. Cheers.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.